So we are excited to be hosting this our annual event, and we are hoping that by the time this evening ends, that you will have a lot of insight when it comes to cybersecurity, and definitely that will pique your interest. So without wasting much time, I would like to invite the Department Chair of Information Systems Analytics, Dr. Skip Benamati, to introduce the guest speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. I also thank you all for being here. I know it's really nice outside, so many of you probably would rather be doing other things. But I think this should be very interesting. And I'm assuming most of you are business students, and I see a lot of faculty. There's some computer science faculty, so there may also be some computer science students in the room. When you think of cyber, you think of something very technical. And cyber can be very technical. There's a big technical component and a technical aspect to cybersecurity. Protecting the network, all the stuff that has to happen to make our data safe, the network safe, our facilities safe, that's a very technical topic. What we've started here in the business school is something different. We've started a program because cyber is also becoming a very big business problem, to the extent that we think all business students need to know more about cyber. And so we've started a program. We started it as a minor 2 years ago, actually added it as a track in our newly named Information and Cybersecurity Management major starting this past fall. So you can actually study cyber, but from a managerial perspective in the business school. And you'll learn about things like how companies manage the risks you're going to hear about, how they make decisions about how to respond to incidents, what are some of the major things that can happen? How do we put policies and develop policies to protect corporate digital assets? That's the kind of stuff that's in our program. Our partners in computer science are launching a program that is focusing on the more technical aspect of security. So if that's your thing, there will be a program very soon in computer science, and we hope to bring those programs together at some point in a partnership where we can make their students more managerial and they can make our students more technical, and we have a good partnership. So that's the long-term goal. And I need to thank EY. David Shade is our EY representative here today. EY actually threw out some funding, and so Joseph's position and the cybersecurity initiative he talked about is actually the EY cybersecurity initiative, because Ernst & Young has made an investment in helping us push this agenda forward from a managerial perspective. Our other speaker today, and I'm going to let them both self-introduce and talk about their background, is Don Cinco, who is the Chief Integrity Officer for Cleveland Clinic. And Don also has made an investment. He and his wife have endowed money. Don's an alum from Miami. He's an accounting major. Actually, DJ was an accounting major also. And they have made an endowment that will fund faculty training in cyber for learning new technologies, new techniques, keeping ahead of the curve as much as we can. And so I really want to ask for a round of applause for both of these individuals, because they were both instrumental in helping us launch this initiative. So can I have a round of applause, please? So without further ado, I said I'm going to let them self-introduce. DJ, why don't you start, and then we'll let Don go, because I know Don. What they're both going to do today is share their experience, again, not from a technical perspective, but from a business perspective, why cybersecurity is becoming such an issue for companies, and some of the ways maybe that they're combating it. So, you guys can both have one. There you go.
Thanks, Skip. Appreciate the introduction, although I feel like we should have kept the applause till the end to see how we do, whether or not you enjoyed it. But as Skip mentioned, my name is David Shade. You'll hear people also call me DJ. I'm David Jr., so I carry both those names with me here. A proud Miami alum, so I was an accounting major, information systems focus, which is really how I got into the consulting world. So I'm in a partner in our consulting practice based in Chicago. I've been with E&Y for 20 years. My perspective on cyber is really from a business perspective and the risk that it creates with our clients. And we'll talk a little bit more about it as we get into it. But cyber, as Skip mentioned, is not just a technical issue. It is a real business problem. And I know the focus tonight, we're going to be talking about ransomware, which has really kind of changed that landscape significantly. So looking forward to an interactive dialogue with all of you tonight. Don?
Okay, great. I don't know if is this turned on? Can you hear? Okay, great. Thanks. I'm Don Cinco, Chief Integrity Officer at Cleveland Clinic. I'm over the offices of corporate compliance, business ethics, internal audit, and cybersecurity reports to me on a dotted line basis. And I'm going to, I started, again, Miami grad, long time ago, before everybody in this room was born. Went into public accounting at Ernst & Young, Cleveland, was in healthcare for my entire career there before going to Eaton Corporation. I was worldwide audit director there before coming to the clinic 22 years ago into this capacity. And what I want to do is talk about cyber in three different ways. First, I want to talk about, well, how did we get here? How did it, from my perspective, where did it start? How did it evolve? Why healthcare? Because healthcare and manufacturing are the two biggest industries that ransomware has impacted the most. So I'll talk about it from a healthcare perspective primarily. And then thirdly, well, how did I get involved? I'm a CPA, public accounting background, audit compliance. So how did I get involved in cyber in a pretty detailed manner to the extent to where it reports to me on a dotted line basis? So I'll get into that because I think, just as Skip said, cyber is something that's important for not only all business majors, I think, to have an understanding. When you get into whatever job you're going to get into, whatever career you go into, cyber is going to be a significant part of it because IT is the infrastructure of everything. There's no business now or any operation that doesn't involve IT. And if it involves IT, it's going to involve cyber and cyber crimes. So I think no matter what you do, whether it's business or other areas, it's good to understand it, not the details. Again, I'm not an IT person. I don't know the specifics. I couldn't, we have an IT guy in the C-suite that handles my computer. I don't know any of that stuff. But I'm going to talk about, well, how did I get involved and why is it important and what it's done from my career standpoint. So first, let's talk about, to me, how did it evolve to where ransomware is really the big thing now, I mean, worldwide. And for me, it started about, actually it was in 2013. The two big events that occurred was a cyber attack to Target and a cyber attack to TJ Maxx. And those attacks were huge. And what they did is they were attacking credit card information. And so Target lost 40 million credit card numbers with their cyber attack. And what cybercrime was doing in its early stages is they were basically going after retail businesses to steal credit cards and then take those credit card numbers and sell them on the dark web and make money. So that's how they were making money, was stealing credit card numbers. But what happened was they found out even though they got a lot of numbers, it really wasn't paying a lot of money, because what happens when you find out your credit card's stolen? You call the bank, you cancel it, and they give you a new card. So the useful life to a cyber criminal of a credit card number is very, very short, very small dollars. And it got to the point where you can go on the dark web and probably buy 1,000 credit card numbers for like $100, because the odds were all 1,000 of those had probably already been canceled and were of little value, so you were taking a risk. Plus you'd have to go and try to go to Best Buy or something and buy something once 1,000 times, maybe to get one computer or one thing. So it wasn't very profitable. So what happened was, the cyber criminals then kind of went to having malware to try to shut down operations or prevent businesses from being able to do their work. And what they started to do, besides going after credit cards, is then they kind of went to say, well, how can we get into systems and be able to get malware in? And there's really two main ways. Now, you all know phishing. Phishing is the main thing. They send you an email, a fake email. It has a link. You click on it. They get into your system. But one of the things where they can really get in big and get in easy was they looked at the way software is manufactured by the big software companies. And what software companies do, and it's their business model, is when they come up with whatever it is they want the software to do, they want to get it out to market as soon as they can. The whole thing is they don't get any revenue until it's on the market and being sold. And the last thing they do is look at security. They never focused on security, just get it out. Why put all that cost in there? We need to, the marketing side always won the arguments. And then what happens is the software gets out into the market. You as a user are using it and you find problems in in the software. You call the software manufacturer and say, hey, we have this problem. And they go out and they fix it, and they do what they call patching. You're probably familiar with patching, where they then send all their customers a patch saying, here, we found a problem in the software. You have to apply this patch, and that prevents the vulnerability and the like. And it's so common that software gets out quick. Users find problems, patches get sent out. Companies are found to have problems on timely patching. They'll get the patch and they'll patch it whenever they get around to it. Because a lot of companies delay it, take months to do it. So what cyber criminals started doing is they started saying, well, wait a minute, if we buy all these softwares, as vulnerabilities are found, and the companies send out to all the acquirers of the software saying, here's the vulnerability, here's a patch, the cyber criminals are going to get the vulnerability that has to be patched at the same time everybody has to patch it. If companies are taking months to patch it, they've been given the way to get into the software to plant their malware. So now they were going in and saying, we can now put malware into the softwares, into the organizations, without even having to phish and the like, and they can get in pretty big. So we had the software problems from that. And so then they were going in and saying, well, if we can go in and encrypt their data and basically ransom. So now we can ransom and get paid to unencrypt and open it up. So they're looking at, well, what's the best industries to do that? Who has information that's of value to actually to steal first, to steal the data and download it? And they looked at healthcare because, okay, they learned that credit card information, had a short life. But what's on the front page of every medical record? Your name, address, social security number, and date of birth. Well, with your name, social security number, and date of birth, I can steal your identity. And those are three things that never change. So while credit card information could be canceled right off the bat, those three items that are in medical records, as long as you're alive, it's always valid. And they can steal it. They can go in, get their malware put in, download the information without you knowing about it. They could sit on it for years. They don't have to steal it and steal your identity immediately afterwards. They could hold on to it for a year, 2 years, 5 years, and start stealing identities down the road because that information is still valid. So that was one of the things that they were doing. But then to do that, they had to then sell the data. So they had this data, but then they had to find somebody to buy it. So they would steal it and then sell it, had to find markets, who would then be able to steal identities. That's when ransomware came in, saying the easiest thing to do is to go in when we get in, put in encryption code, into their applications, and then encrypt their data and hold it and be able to to ransom, saying we're not going to let it go until you pay us X amount of money. So that's kind of how hospitals got in, because hospitals had the most valuable information, other than stealing government secrets and stuff. Hospitals had the most valuable information. So hospitals were the #1 targets at the time from a ransoming standpoint to steal that data. And then, so then what was happening was hospitals were then saying like, okay, well, we need to back up data. Other companies, other industries, so we need to back up our data because if we get ransomed, okay, we'll have to clean it out, but we can back it up and reload it. So then what the cyber criminals were doing is they were saying, okay, when we go in, we're not going to just go in and encrypt it right away. We're going to go in, they're not going to know we're in, and we're going to let it sit for several months so that our malware gets into their backup data. And so now they don't just come in and just turn it on, they let it go into the backup data and then turn it on. So the last couple of years, if you've been seeing some of the big malware or encryption and hits that have happened, it's the companies couldn't back up. They've been encrypted for months. Things have been shut down. It's been a very, very big cost. So that's kind of how we went from stealing credit card information to stealing the information, directly, other information directly to having ransomware. So that's kind of how it evolved. And that's how healthcare got involved. And I know DJ is going to cover other industries and talk about other things. But lastly, what I wanted to cover, well, so then how did I get involved? So I'm, the head of internal audit, corporate compliance, business ethics. So how did I get involved? So I talked about 2013 is when cybercrime started taking off with the TJ Maxx and the Target scenario. And again, it was after credit cards. So when you looked at all industries, the way credit cards used to be from 2013 and prior is when you'd buy something at the store, they would have a credit card machine, you'd put your card in, they'd roll it over, you'd sign the card, and basically your credit information was going into that company's data, which is why they were able to steal 40 million credit card numbers from Target, because it was in their applications. And then the company would then transfer the information to the credit card companies. So what happened was then companies had to go from taking information directly into their systems to going to point of purchase systems, where now you put your credit card into the system and it goes directly to your credit card company, and it avoids going into the retail organization. But it was very costly to switch all that. So for instance, at the clinic, I mean, we're a hospital, but we're also a retail organization because we take payments on site. And we had hundreds of sites that took credit cards. You can imagine all across a hospital, family health centers, they all took credit cards. So then we did a project and calculated it was gonna cost $4 million for the clinic to go from being able to take the credit card information, keep it in our network, to going point of purchase. That's a lot of money for any organization. What was happening from an IT perspective is the IT organization with the clinic was coming up with, well, here's the stuff that we need to do to protect ourselves from changing our credit card scenarios, to putting up defenses to prevent malware from coming in. Very expensive to do it. And again, this was 9 years ago, and cyber wasn't nearly what it is today 9 years ago. But the CIO that we had, he would present to the senior management and to the capital committee that doles out the money, his list of the top 10 projects that they needed to do in IT. And think about it. So we're a large health system. We're run by doctors. He would come up with his list, and he would have 4 items on there that would be cybersecurity related, and he'd have 6 items on there that were related to capital acquisitions in order to improve patient outcomes, be able to save lives, and the rest. So if you're the doctors and you can only approve 5 of the 10 projects, you're approving the 5 that improve patient outcomes, save lives, and all that, because what's the cyber thing? Do we really need to do that? Is it just IT wanting more toys to have? And so for a number of years, he kept getting, the cyber-related stuff taken off the mat, and the direct patient care stuff was getting approved. I'm reporting to the board all these vulnerabilities that we have from a cyber standpoint, saying we have vulnerabilities, we need to be doing something. The CIO is saying, well, I'm trying, it's not happening. So again, it was about 9 years ago, the CIO comes to me and says, Don, you keep talking about our vulnerabilities, I keep trying to get assets, but I'm not getting them approved. Could you do something about it yourself? So I said, sure. I said, I'll take it on. So I ended up putting together I'll never forget this. I did this PowerPoint where I went to the Capitol Committee, as Chief Integrity Officer, and I asked for $7 million for cyber projects, related to a number of things. I spelled out what it is, and I talked about, here's the need, here's the vulnerabilities, and here's the cost to the organization if something happens in any of these places. And it was a pretty effective presentation, in that when I was done, the chair of the Capitol Committee said, he goes, Don, you presented this in a way that if anything happens to this organization with cyber, it's on me, because I'm the one that's doing it. And they approved the project. And again, back then it was $7 million. Today we're in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But what the committee said was, they said, Don, we're approving this, but you have to have oversight over it. You have to be the lead. They're going to do it, but you have to report to us what's happening, how it's being spent, what are the outcomes, is it happening? And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. So that's kind of how I got involved. One, to be able to get the funding for it, for a real need, and then I was put in charge of oversight. Now, I'm not an IT person. don't know anything about it, but I kind of rode herd over the spending of the 7 and what happened. And literally ever since then, I've been involved. That's how I got the dotted line. I still am heavily involved in the oversight role. I meet with our cyber group every Tuesday afternoon. We have one of our audit committee members here in the audience, and he knows that we talk about cyber frequently, and that he knows that I spend a lot of time on it. And so that's how I got involved. But what was important, and the message I want all of you to understand, is the reason it's of value to you to understand cyber and the programs that are going to be taught here is one of the problems that professionals have, and this is professionals in any line of business, whether you're IT, you're a CPA, you're a lawyer, you're an engineer, any of the professions. One of the problems that professionals have is communicating to people outside of their own profession. Everybody talks in their lingo. They assume everybody knows what they're talking about. And it's a big problem, particularly with IT people, but same with engineers or any of us, that the IT people, when they would present, they would talk in their language. Board members, management and operations, they have no idea what they're talking about. If they don't understand it, they're not going to fund it. They're not going to support it. And what I was able to do is I was able to take the technical IT stuff and be able to communicate it in a way that they understood the need, they understood why it was important to do, and the like. And I've been doing that literally ever since. I've been invited to the senior management meetings when we have IT presentations. I'm invited there so I can hear what's going on, and they kind of look to me to kind of like, okay, is what he's saying, is that correct, and the like. So keep in mind in your communications that when you talk to people outside, when you're in the, you get out and you're in your jobs, when you're talking across departments, be sure you're communicating in a way that others can understand. Because if you can do that, that's a huge benefit to you, and people will come to you. They'll want you. They'll need you because you play an important role. Because like I said, I'm not an IT person. I would have a real problem with my own computer if I had to. But but I understand the industry, the vulnerabilities, what needs to be done, and the like. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I was just going to jump in there, Don, because I think what you just described in that skill is one of the biggest areas and opportunities in business and with the students here around being able to translate risk from a technical perspective into something that business leaders can understand. So I spend a lot of time working with companies from a business perspective, so boards, audit committees, executives, that might not understand all the technical ins and outs from a cyber perspective, but they know it's a top risk for their business. Every company I work with, regardless of industry, you talked about healthcare, you talked about retail, you're all familiar with the big breaches in those areas, but that was one of the things that ransomware really changed, is that now everybody is a target. Every business, as long as you make money and you have systems, you're going to be a target for ransomware. And it really changed the landscape because now no matter what company you go to, cyber is going to be in the boardroom. The executives are going to be talking about it. They're likely going to be doing practice drills, tabletop exercises, or at least that's what we'll be telling them they should be doing to get ready for this stuff because it's a top issue. Ransomware right now, when you think about cyber, it's the #1 thing that's happening in the market. So from a ransomware perspective, you talked a little bit about what it is, right? When you think about ransomware and the organizations that operate it, these are businesses that are operating these ransomware operations. They aren't people sitting in their basement. These are well-funded businesses that are doing research on their targets. They have pipelines. They're trying to exploit their targets, realize the revenue, and then move on to the next one. They're recruiting talent. There's businesses being built around ransomware. Google ransomware as a service. So there's companies out there that they don't actually do the ransomware, but you can pay them to get all the tools you need to do the ransomware. And they take their 30%, they'll facilitate taking the payment from the company, take their 30%, and then pass it on to you. It's a cottage industry that's really exploded around ransomware. And things like cryptocurrency, Made it a lot easier, right? A lot easier to extract money out. So why does ransomware work? Big factor, companies don't report this. 65% of the companies that are compromised by ransomware never report it. You never even hear about it, right? So it's very easy for them to go in because they know they're never going to be on the radar from a law enforcement perspective, from a publicity perspective. These organizations rarely, if ever, are caught, prosecuted, in any way face penalties for these activities. So it's almost like, why wouldn't you do it, right? Many of these outfits are sponsored, nation-state sponsored, and they sit in countries where they're essentially protected by governments, which makes it even harder for them to access. And then, the final point is people pay. In most situations, companies are paying these ransoms. They might be relying on their insurance to try to cover some of that, but there's a lot of developments even around that. I won't get into all the specifics, but insurance is becoming a very difficult vehicle to mitigate the risk around ransomware, sorry. So, when we look at how do you protect an organization against ransomware, and most people understand this, but we still continue to have this conversation. I mean, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when is it going to happen, how prepared are you for that event, and have you done the right diligence to make it at least difficult for them to deploy it? Are you able to detect it, respond to it, and then how quickly? Just some quick stats. For every day that a ransomware attack is occurring, so one day in a production environment is 2 weeks to recover, right? And just because you've paid the ransom doesn't mean they turn the switch on and everything's like it used to be, right? It takes weeks for organizations to recover from these incidents. And just a quick story from one of my clients, just to leave them anonymous, big cookie manufacturer. We'll call them a cookie manufacturer, so big retail company. They experienced a ransomware attack. They were somewhat prepared, but they weren't prepared for the scenario they faced. So the actual systems that were targeted weren't the corporate back office, general ledger stuff. They actually encrypted their OT network in their facilities that's manufacturing stuff, right? So think about the computers that operate how you make cookies, right? If Elmer, you can make a lot of cookies, you got to move really quick. That's all computer operated. They froze those systems, encrypted those systems, and it's funny, not at the time, but now, these things were, once they recovered the production facility, there was chocolate in all of these systems that was frozen, essentially destroying the machines, destroying the infrastructure in that plant, and tripling the cost of recovery and extending the recovery time. So some of these scenarios can be very, very, very destructive and disruptive for organizations. And so we continually talk to organizations about being prepared. I mentioned the tabletop exercises and doing drills, all the way up to the CEO audit committee level, with the key question, would we pay the ransom, and how quickly are we going to pay that ransom? Because it's so important in terms of speed to recovery. Just one point, building on what you said, Don, around folks in this room and how this can impact you. I think cyber, sometimes when people look at it and they think about targets, they think it's the company, it might be the CFO, the CEO, maybe the treasurer, but it's actually all of you. And you're going to be in the workforce soon, and you will be targeted by bad actors from a cyber perspective, whether it be for ransomware, you mentioned phishing. These are very sophisticated outfits. You do research on customers, you do research on markets, they do research on you. They look at you on social media, they look at you on LinkedIn. So being aware of that and having a heightened awareness around your responsibility, whether you go into a cyber field or not, anywhere in a business, you will be a target. And so being aware of that and being proactive and vigilant about reminding colleagues, identifying and reporting things is going to be really important in your career no matter what you do. And in Don's point, just to reiterate around the ability and the opportunity to translate that technical risk into business risk is such an important skill. And there's not enough of that in the market today, I can tell you that right now. So maybe with that, does it make sense to open it up to some questions from the audience? Or Joe, you want to take the mic?
While you're doing that, I'm going to make a couple of follow-up points. At our, you were talking about resiliency. At our last November audit committee meeting, one of the things that we emphasized is the clinic was evolving from trying to protect the infrastructure from getting attacked to what do we do when we're attacked. And just what you were saying, DJ, that organizations, we do so many tabletops. We've invested a lot of money in the recovery side of the thing because you have to be prepared because it can happen, literally can happen to anybody. So focusing on that. And even the businesses, not only is ransomware a business, but there's US companies, organizations that do the negotiation for you. So if a company gets ransomed, they hire a firm that negotiates with the cyber criminals. And the cyber criminals know the negotiators, from that perspective as well. So there's businesses coming around, people getting ransomed. And then lastly, I was going to say, even from a negotiation, a very good friend of mine, he got his home computer ransomed. So your home computer can get ransomed. And it was funny because it wasn't funny, but what happened was, so the cyber criminal wanted $400. So he got his home computer, his ransom. The guy said he wanted $400. My friend said, I don't have $400. How about $200? And the cyber criminal said, okay, $200. and he sent him the $200 and he unencrypted his computer. So there's all kinds of negotiations. But go ahead, Joe.
Thank you for that excellent discussion. Now we're going to open it up for questions. Any questions? Oh, okay.
Yeah, get a mic. I know generally governments don't really want companies paying ransoms in other countries because they just fund these ransomware businesses to go after other companies in their same country. But I also know that companies generally want to pay the ransom because they want to get their business back up and running. If you were a lawmaker what would you try to do to help companies maintain their continuity while also not funding a bunch of new ransomware activities?
You want that? You want me to do that? Oh yeah, so we got the one. So great question, because yes, the governments say it's actually illegal to fund them because you're giving monies to criminals. But what you're supposed to do, and like DJ said, a lot of them don't do it, but we have at the clinic, we have great ties with the government agencies, Homeland Security, FBI, and the like. And the key is if you get ransomed, to get the government involved in the process so that they're involved with the decision making. Because if they're involved in the decision making, what you need to do, if the answer is you have to pay, well, you're basically getting the government to say, yes, we agree, you need to pay that. And they'll, they don't want you to pay, but they know there's a situation where it has to happen. So for instance, in the company, I can't remember the name of the gasoline company in New Jersey that got ransomed, the government got involved. I think they paid a $4 million ransom, but the government, they knew what it was. They knew that it was important for the East Coast of America to get the gasoline going again. So the government approved them making that payment. So that's the best thing to do. But like you said, DJ, a lot of companies aren't getting them involved. But the second part of your question is, what really needs to happen is there needs to be some type of federal process of how to protect systems. Where do you get funding? If you look at hospitals, a lot of the hospitals that get ransomed are small community hospitals. And the reason is they don't have the money to set up the proper cybersecurity programs like that, for instance, the Cleveland Clinics and the Mayos and the Johns Hopkins can do. And the cyber criminals know that they don't have the protections. They're pretty easy to get. And so no hospital can afford to pay tens of millions of dollars for it. So there needs to be some type of federal program, or how are we going to do this? How can we make it how can we set it up to protect in the first place, let alone what do we do once we have it?
Yeah, and maybe just one point to add. It's tangential to your question, but I think it's important, especially for the accounting folks in the room around SEC requirements. So the SEC now is considering heavier disclosures around cyber. So now companies are, the 65% that I mentioned that don't report this stuff, they would be required to if they're an SEC registrant. So now the investing public would know when not just ransomware, but any cyber incident happened. And the proposed rules from the SEC also talk about more descriptions around the actual risk profile of the company, how those risks are being addressed from a cyber perspective, and contemplating having a representative on the board that is a cybersecurity expert, right? Which is a big deal. I think when I look across my clients, I can find examples where they do have that cyber expert, but in a lot of cases they don't, right? So that really introduces some significant changes that the SEC is really trying to push on U.S. public companies to create better transparency into cyber risk and how they're addressing it. So it's a really big shift. Hey, Brian. Yep. 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 Yeah.
But it's one thing to report it, whether you have to report it once it happens. The thing that gets me is I can imagine cyber criminals starting to want to read footnotes to financial statements. If a company has to describe its cyber program and vulnerabilities and all this kind of stuff, you're telling the cyber criminals what companies have strong programs, which ones have weak programs, how much they're spending, and the like. And you're almost giving them a menu as to who to attack.
Well, and maybe just the counterpoint to that is, well, then you don't want to have to disclose things that are bad, right? So it could drive behavior that actually,
Where they lie.
well, not lie, but
They don't have the money.
but when you mentioned that,
Yeah, that's right.
the problem, or the issue around funding, right? And this is something that you as business students and as professionals in your career will see, right? When you're funding things to prevent, well, could it go wrong? Maybe. Well, if it's not going wrong today, do we really need to fix it, right? But if now we have to disclose this to the investing public and it introduces more risk and it creates more scrutiny on our company, it really might drive changes in investment. So,
Absolutely. And that's a very insightful conversation right there. Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, I guess going off that, so, when ransomware attacks happen, is there ever a likelihood, because, you are still dealing with criminals, that you pay the money and then they don't unlock the system? Is that?
absolutely.
Okay.
That actually happens in a lot of cases where there is ransomware. They say they will decrypt it. They either don't do it or they provide keys that don't effectively work, right? And to Don's point, now that, your earlier point around backups and even cloud, they're reaching deeper and deeper into the environment to make it even harder for you to recover, whether or not you pay the ransom and they actually decrypt it. But yeah, that happens all the time.
Well, the other thing that happens, and this is a lot of people don't realize it, when they give you the key to unencrypt it, their malware is still in your system. So the malware doesn't go away. And so one of the things that happens is, you pay them, and then 6 months later, they can turn it back on again and say, well, we want more money. And that's the thing, so when they turn it off, they don't pull it out of your system, they just turn it off. And they have the ability to turn it back on. And that's the risk. But if you don't pay it, then you're lost. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Just like DH said, that happens.
No guarantees.
Yeah, you're dealing with, like you said, you're dealing with criminals. Yeah. Well, you know what happened on that though? This is kind of interesting. At the time of the pandemic, a number of the cyber criminals got together and they agreed that they would not attack hospitals. They would hold off on attacking hospitals during the pandemic. You know, they were going to, you know, show some empathy during the things. But the problem was they didn't all go into that pack. And so there were still some cyber criminals that were attacking hospitals, even though there was this pact. And I was just reading, I just copied the article yesterday. I didn't know this until it was released yesterday, but the federal government uncovered and stopped a major cyber criminal ring that had targeted in 2020 to shut down 400 hospitals in the United States. And they stopped it, they discovered it. But there had been 400 hospitals at one time shut down. But you know, again, the government's doing a lot of stuff that we don't know about in that, but it's scary stuff. I think there's somebody over here.
Hi, I'm Kodakas Bibak, an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Software Engineering. So encryption, cryptography, and quantum computing are just close to my heart. I just do research on that. I teach those courses in Miami. I'm very excited for that. So something that I believe many companies have not considered that, maybe have not thought about that yet, is about quantum attacks. So many people believe that in the next few years, maybe by 2025, 26, so the next couple of years, we do have commercialized quantum computers. And then they have a they are really big, they bring a big challenge, really, probably the biggest challenge for security that ever we had, way more than ransomware. So what happens that, for example, medical data, you said medical data, I mean SSN, I mean name, birthday, and so on, they are valid forever. And they are actually a good target of military documents and so on. What happens is that imagine that in 2025, we have a quantum computer. Then what happens, not only in that point and after that, pretty much all data are at risk, but also any time before that, for example, right now that we are speaking, all data are at risk as well, because they can go, because right now, governments, some foreign governments, adversaries, so they're gathering the data. Any transaction that you are doing right now, any data they are storing, they are capturing that through some various protocols. So they're storing the data. But right now, they cannot use that because they're encrypted. For example, when I send you an email, then that one is encrypted. So they cannot really, they capture that, but they cannot use that. But what happens that when they have quantum computer, then they can go back for any years, for many years, they can back actually 2020, 18, 17, whatever, and read essentially all those data. So there's really big danger, actually. So NIST, the National Institute of Standard Technology, is a government agency. They are actually in the process of standardization of various protocols, quantum safe protocols for signatures, for encryption as well. And I guess in the next few months, they have actually right now some finalist candidates, and in the next few months, maybe by fall or so, they will announce the finalists, the winners for both encryption and quantum safe encryption and quantum safe signatures. I guess the industries, I guess you should go back again, talk to the leaders again to give some money to the IT people again, because there's a big money they need to essentially implement pretty much anything that we are using right now. They have to change that. So it costs a lot of money for any industry to update and deploy actually the new algorithms. Pretty much anything needs to be updated in order to be safe against these quantum attacks. So just a heads up that it's coming. Bad news, unfortunately, are coming. So what happened in the next few years? So would be good for the business to be quite ready for that. Yeah, thank you.
And I think it's a great point, and it's one of those things. Just even if you look back on cyber's been an issue for decades, but it's really heated up over the last 15 years. But there's always the next frontier in terms of controls and what needs to be implemented. And then once that's implemented, they figure out how to break it, and then it's going to be the next one. Is everybody familiar with multi-factor authentication, right? So this is where it's not just your user and ID or password, but it's also maybe you get a ping on your phone with a PIN, maybe it's some type of biometric. Well, those controls are now being bypassed. hackers can now get around MFA, right? And that was kind of the gold standard. You got MFA, you don't need to worry about it, right? It isn't widespread yet, but MFA has been compromised. So now what's the next solution to secure accounts, right? And that's going to be a constant battle between organizations and even personal, right? I mean, everybody in here has a computer, has digital assets that they want to protect. To your point, and your friend that got ransomware, you're going to be a target. And so there's this constant evolution and development in the cyberspace around the good guys and the bad guys. Good question.
My question kind of revolves around, you were talking about how the government, like, there's the reports, 60% reports of like what's actually happening, but behind closed doors, we don't always know what's happening, especially the common folk of everyone. I guess like understanding that it's possible for the pipeline ransomware attack, do you think in the future there's soon going to need to be a much more transparent line with what's actually going on with these future attacks? Because the pipeline attack definitely affected millions of people's day-to-day lives. Do you think in the near future sometime there might need to be some sort of more transparent communication between whether it's the government and us or what's really going on behind closed doors?
Yeah, I think the example that I gave with the SEC is around U.S. Publicly traded companies. Obviously, I think when you're talking about, I think what you're getting at is the collaboration between the government and private organizations and making sure that information is shared, enabling both sides to better protect itself. I know there are networks where the government is working with, especially critical infrastructure. There's a lot of collaboration between critical infrastructure organizations and the government around cyber issues, like what are they actually seeing, how they can prevent, fix, recover those types of issues. Unfortunately, there's maybe not as much transparency around all of that as the public might want, and it depends, right? I mean, it can be a good thing. You want transparency so people understand what's happening, especially other organizations that maybe are outside of critical infrastructure. But it's a balance, because the more you make public, it's almost like, think about any type of investigation, right? The more you make public about that investigation, people know what to do, or the person that's in question knows how close you are to them, right? So it's a delicate balance in terms of transparency and how much and who and how much value does it drive. I don't know if you have things to add.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think it's a great point, because what's happening now is organizations that have direct lines to the public are reporting it. So like, for instance, if you're a hospital, you're going to work with the government, because if we're shut down or a hospital is shut down, everyone's going to know about it, because you're not seeing patients, you can't accept patients. If you're a utility, the gas pipelines, I mean, if you're in those organizations, you can't be ransomed and not have anybody know about it. So all the ones with direct public facing, I think, are doing it now, working pretty close with the government on those things. To the point is, the private companies are the ones that are in the middle markets that don't have direct public facing. Those are the ones that are saying, well, why, what value is it to us to let people know that we got ransomed and we have vulnerabilities? And that's going to be the tougher ones. The public companies probably will, the SEC will require it. We work a lot with the government on it, from a protection standpoint, because we haven't been ransomed at this point. So at least I haven't checked yet today on my emails, but I think I would have known about it by now. But from a protection standpoint, but if the clinic got ransomed, it would be front page news whether we liked it or not. So what else? What other questions?
You have questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Cayenne, and my question is that what tools are you using in Cleveland Clinic for business continuity planning? So if, like, in the event of a shutdown happen, what would you do?
What tools do we have? Well, I mean, well, I'll tell you, that's the one thing about me. I couldn't tell you what the tools are, and I don't want to know what the tools are. So I can't speak to the names of all the stuff. But what, like DJ said, what we do, what most good organizations do, are tabletop exercises. So what happens is, if in practicing for a ransomware attack, it impacts just about every part of your organization. So for instance, we do our tabletop exercises. It's not just IT, but finance is there, audit and compliance is there, the doctors and nurses are there, media communications is partaking in it, protective services is partaking in it, and so you do tabletop exercises. I mean, and they're legitimate. We have an outside company come in to manage it, and it's like, okay, this just happened. Now what do you do? And you practice all the things that you need to do. What does IT need to do from a tool standpoint to, either, prevent it from spreading more, or, to try to get rid of it, whatever. But that's just a small part of the exercise. It's, in our area, what do we have to do from a government reporting standpoint? Media communications, what do we need to do as far as talking to the media? And from that perspective, we had our last one, the doctors and nurses were a big part of it. Because all of a sudden, they're used to working with electronic medical records. They're used to working with technology that's using applications. And now you've got patients in your hospital, and you have no technology. They're having to use paper. Only the more experienced doctors have ever used paper. Any of the doctors for the last 20 years have been doing electronic, and they're like, what's paper? So the doctors and nurses have to practice. What do they do with patients? What do they do with patients in the operating room? That's all practice as far as what you're doing. So it's really, every part of the organization is involved, and if you practice it, then when it does happen, you know what to do. And so DJ's point on that is so important, is to do those tabletops and to do them frequently. I mean, we do them frequently.
So we're going to have time for just 2 more questions. So I think there was a question here.
Yeah, I saw a metric a while ago that about 70 or so % of so-called malicious attacks are caused by, phishing scams from the lower level employee part of a company. So, employee A clicks on a link that they think is from their boss, and, a virus is automatically in your system. Would you say that the companies you guys have worked with have, robust education sessions for your employees, or training modules, so that people know not to click on such links, or how to recognize threats in your systems?
Yeah, I know we do it at the Cleveland Clinic. We have phishing tests where we send, our cyber group sends out emails, phishing emails out, to literally all 72,000 caregivers. And they're getting pretty sophisticated on the ones. We just had one that came out. I remember I came in the morning, I turned on my computer, and there was an email, and I said, okay, I think this is a test. But boy, it was really good. I mean, it was like, I kind of wanted to click on it to see what would happen. We do them almost like every other month, and I wanted, because I can tell that this is internal, but then maybe it's not internal, and because what happens, I'm told, is if you click on it, it takes you to an education thing that teaches you why you shouldn't have done it. And I said, I would love, and knock on wood, I've never clicked on one of these, and I don't know how many we've had so far, but I said, if I did it knowing, because I wanted to see it, I would never be able to live it down, because cyber would be saying, Don Cinco, fell for one of our things, and and I'd say, no, I was really trying to do it, and then they wouldn't believe it. But yeah, we do a lot.
And I think it's an excellent point, and it's one of the things that you'll hear in the security industry is they talk about the biggest vulnerability sits between the computer and the back of the chair, and it's the person, right? And no matter the user awareness, the training is critical, and these things are so sophisticated. To your point now, that it is very easy to fool people. And we've actually had organizations where we started to coach them as it's not just the person that should be, and not penalized, because it's a balance, right? You don't want to have that become a performance metric, but how do you raise visibility so leadership within the organization can help manage that message, because we've had instances with clients, treasurers were big targets for phishing scams. With emails, they control significant amounts of money, and they can decide where wires go, and you're getting spoofed emails that are spearphished at treasurers that look like they're from the CFO, and they're transferring money out of organizations because they think they're following instructions. So it's not just the lower level employees where this happens. I mean, it can happen to anybody, and raising visibility and showing some humility around that, tone at the top really matters in whatever topic you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Joseph. Don, you said you were very successful in convincing a board to give you $7 million. That's fantastic. Not everybody's that successful in doing that. Many of our business majors here will grow up and be on boards someday. What are some questions that a board member should be asking of their information technology or their information security offices to see if they're, to ensure that they're prepared for ransomware and other attacks?
Well, I mean, there's a number of questions. I mean, first, they should get an understanding of what the program is. So, one of the things that companies should be doing, they're really required to do, but should be doing, is an annual risk assessment. So if I'm a board, I would want to know what the risk assessment is. So show me the risk assessment where you've identified, within cyber, and everybody does. I mean, there's lots of risk assessments within an organization. There's enterprise risk assessment, internal audit, corporate compliance, safety, and cyber. But cyber should be doing an annual risk assessment. At the Cleveland Clinic, we review it. Audit and compliance reviews and works with them on their risk assessment. But the board should understand what the risk assessment is, what the priorities are. So you're gonna have risks, and everyone's gonna have a number of risks. I mean, just being in business, you're gonna have risks. So then, what's the prioritization of the risks? What are the ones that have the biggest impact? More likely to happen. And then, if those are the risks, how are you mitigating those risks? So I would want to know, if those are the identified risks, what's your mitigation plan? One of the big problems is you can't do everything at once. So you're gonna have lots of risks, but you not only don't have enough money, you don't have enough people and resources to address all your risks at one time. So what's your prioritization of the risks? And then what's your plan on, what's basically like a 3-year plan on mitigating them? So that's the biggest thing. Then you're going to want to know about your resources. Do you have enough resources? If I'm a board, I'm saying, I'm asking the cyber people, do you have enough resources to do your job? In the people, dollars, and the like. So I think those are the two biggest things: the resources to do it. And as a board member, do you understand your risks, priority of the risks, and do they make sense to you?
The last thing I would just add to that really quick, Joe, is have you tested it, right? And what were the results of those tests? I have a company that I work with where the audit committee didn't tell management, engaged a third party, and did their own A&P, targeted A&P without telling anybody in IT until it was over. And they identified some trophies, got those trophies, and went back and then told management, hey, we got all this stuff. We need you to go back and research how this third party we hired was able to do it. So I think audit committees and boards are being much more proactive around this topic. And I think quite frankly, I think you might see more of that.
All right, on behalf of the IS department, I want to say a big thank you to two of our presenters, Don and Bill. Yeah, and for the students, I want to say we're so grateful that you were able to be here. And as you're leaving for attendance, make sure that you scan the QR code to register your attendance. Thank you so much.